Hi, I'm Deanna Little and I teach flute at MTSU, and I'm very happy to be bringing you some tips for the 2024 MidState Flute Etudes. Should you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me at deanna.little@mtsu.edu. I want to congratulate you because if you're watching this video, there's a good chance that you are working on improving your flute playing by preparing the Mid-State Etudes. A couple of tips I wanted to throw at you. In my opinion, I think what you should be striving for as the number one thing is sound. Work towards playing with your most beautiful sound. Second tip I have for you: don't go faster than you can play everything as accurately and beautiful as you can. It's not a speed race. It's much more important for you to learn how to make a beautiful sound and learn the correct rhythms, the correct notes, and with a sense of musicality. Always, always, always practice slowly with a metronome when you're first learning the etude. So that way you don't learn it with mistakes. And lastly, the flute takes so much air. And one thing I find myself saying to all of my students and reminding myself of is to breathe. So breathe deeply and breathe fully and use your full breath of air to produce a sound on the flute. Good luck. There are two flats in the key, B flat and E flat, so yay, right? All of you are used to playing in that key, and so that is good news. There are 4 beats in a measure, and the quarter note's getting the beat. There is an F in the excerpt that is sharp, and so make sure you're playing third finger F sharp. Begin very slowly so that you are following the right notes and the articulation. The articulation changes up quite a bit in this excerpt. So if you go slowly and learn it with the right tonguing, you'll be able to go quicker much sooner. Measure 3 of the technical excerpt has low register repeated notes. Work on tonguing them clearly with a nice, gentle sound. Measure 4, note that there's a chromatic scale from your C natural to the final G in the measure. So I would pluck that outside of the excerpt and just practice your chromatic scale going up and down until you get really fluent at it, and then put it back into the excerpt and add the correct articulation slowly. Articulation is important in these 2 measures and the whole excerpt. It changes a lot, so take care to go slowly enough so you have the ability to tongue where it says. Play the huge crescendo in measure 4, all the way to forte, and then sing on the final G of that measure. Measures 5 and 6 in this excerpt are marked mezzo forte, so play with a nice full sound. Notice that you've got staccato eighth notes in both measures, so play them short with a little bounce, and be sure that you don't rush because they're short and there's a little space after them. Middle register F sharp, again, third finger, but the high register is F natural. Also, a friendly reminder for measure 6, make sure that you play middle register E flat with your first finger off to get the best tone. And note the diminuendo in measure 6, which will happen naturally because you're descending, but it does diminuendo to piano. And finally, measures 7 and 8, you begin piano and you end forte. Also, articulation is important. Especially the last measure, it changes up. You have tongue 2, slur 2, and then slur 2, tongue 2. Make sure you put some beautiful singing vibrato on the last G. And notice in measure 7, on beat 3, it's just chromatic from middle register D to F sharp. So enjoy playing this. It's your technical excerpt, so play it with bounce and energy and joy. And one more time, I want to remind you, it is not a speed race. It's much more valuable to you as a musician if you play it at a tempo that you can play it with right notes, right rhythms, right articulation, and the most important thing, a beautiful sound. Good luck. The 7 and 8 lyrical excerpt has one flat in the key. It's in the key of F major, so practice your F major scale up and down 2 octaves until you get really fluent with it. That will really help you prepare for this excerpt. If you tend to miss the E naturals because you just don't play them very often, go ahead and highlight them in your music. That will help you remember to play E natural rather than E flat. There's 3 beats in a measure, and the first note is a dotted quarter note. So watch out for that rhythm. I find that when a note gets dotted, quite often it gets miscounted. So check with your teachers and your band directors to make sure you're counting that rhythm accurately. It begins piano and crescendos to mezzo forte in the 3rd measure. The 3rd measure has grace notes. I recommend you learn that measure cleanly with a beautiful sound with no grace notes. And then once that feels solid to you, go ahead and add them in. If it still messes you up, leave them out. You can add them in later. And I also believe that it's okay to not add them if you play it your very best without. One other tip I like to recommend to people, if when you begin the piece, if you're working on making it all the way to the 4th measure to breathe after that dotted quarter note F, something I like to do is before I begin the piece, I will take 3 beats in of breath and 3 beats out of breath with my metronome, and then I'll breathe in again fully before I begin. That often just gives me a little bit of extra air and helps me set my focus. In measure 4, breathe after the dotted quarter note and take a good full breath. You then enter mezzo piano on 8th notes and 3 and, followed by a triplet on the downbeat of measure 5. So be careful with the subdivisions of the duple 8th notes and the triplet 8th notes. Measure 6 is mezzo forte and is slurred all the way to measure 8. So try to make the long slur in one breath. I take a quick breath after that low A. That helps me play the grace notes more cleanly. If you can make it to the low F in measure 9, that's great. Also, I recommend leaving out the grace notes in measure 8 when you're learning that, so that you play with a solid rhythm and a beautiful sound. And then once that feels very natural to you, go ahead and go back and add the grace notes. Measure 10 begins pianissimo. I also recommend that you take a really good breath before you start this phrase because you need to crescendo all the way to forte in measure 13, and you want to be sure and have enough air so that you can make a beautiful singing sound on the high F. I also try to start measure 10 with a little bit of a different color. I think more ooh in my throat and try to get a little bit more of a gentle open sound. One other thing, be careful to count your dotted quarter notes correctly in measure 10 and measure 11. The final phrase of this excerpt, measure 14 to the end, begins mezzo forte, and you also have two trills. The first trill, high D natural. You're going to trill high D natural to high E natural, and the trill fingering that you're going to wiggle is going to be your third finger of your left hand, gives you D to E. I also start this with one turn of the real fingering so that the proper pitch or the better pitch and sound is first heard before you go off into a fast trill. Measure 15, it's just normal fingerings, trilling F to G. You will diminuendo all the way to piano at the end of the excerpt, and then just be careful in measure 16 to watch out for the articulation there. One last reminder, the grace notes in this excerpt can often mess up your rhythm, so learn it without the grace notes so that you get a solid fundamental rhythm with a beautiful sound, accurate notes, and the right articulation. And then you can isolate those little bits that have grace notes and just practice them outside of the excerpt to get some fluidity and ease in the grace notes. And all of the grace notes in this piece, I use the real fingerings. It's a lyrical excerpt, and I find that the grace notes are also part of the lyrical character, so it is important to have your best sound on the grace notes as well. Enjoy the excerpt.